Story 1. I never thought I'd be the one posting on Rentitle people, but here we are. I've been a single mom for about 8 months now, raising my son on my own since my husband was deployed overseas. He's serving in the military, and while he tries his best to be present through video calls and messages, the physical absence is hard. Being a first-time parent alone is terrifying, but I've been managing. My little boy is the sweetest 6-month-old you could imagine, with those chubby cheeks that make older ladies at the grocery store stop and coo. Before becoming a mom, I worked as a kindergarten teacher, but I took extended leave after my pregnancy became complicated. I was diagnosed with preeclampsia in my 3rd trimester, and after an emergency C-section, both my son and I needed extra recovery time. The silver lining was that I got to spend more time with my baby, watching him grow and develop his personality. Every little milestone, the first smile, the first giggle, the first time he rolled over felt like winning the lottery. But being alone with a baby 24/7 can be isolating. My parents live 3 states away, and my in-laws, though supportive, are dealing with my father-in-law's health issues. Most of my friends are either childless or have older kids, so our schedules rarely align. The loneliness sometimes feels suffocating. That's why I started my coffee shop routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I'd bundle up my son in his stroller and walk the 6 blocks to this cozy little coffee place called Been There, Done That. It wasn't just about getting caffeine, though as a sleep-deprived mom, that was certainly a perk. It was about being around other adults, hearing normal conversations, and feeling like I was still part of society. The staff there knew me by now. They always had my usual ready, a large caramel latte with an extra shot of espresso, and would save me the corner table near the window that had enough space for the stroller. Sometimes I'd bring a book, sometimes I'd just people watch while my son napped. It was my sacred me time in the chaos of new motherhood. Last Tuesday started like any other. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I had dressed my son in the adorable bear onesie my sister had sent. He was in a good mood, babbling happily as I pushed the stroller through the fallen leaves. I felt pretty good myself. I had managed to shower, put on clean clothes that didn't have spit up on them, and even applied a little mascara. Small victories. I arrived at the coffee shop around 10:30 a.m. when it was busy but not packed. The line was moderate, about 5 people ahead of me. I got in line, parking the stroller next to me so I could peek at my son, who was starting to doze off. Everything was normal until I heard a throat clearing aggressively behind me. I turned around and saw her, a woman probably in her early 60s with that classic, "I need to speak to the manager" haircut, dyed an unnatural shade of blonde. She was wearing an expensive-looking athleisure outfit and holding one of those fancy reusable coffee cups that cost more than a week's worth of diapers. Woman behind me, "Excuse me, but your stroller is taking up too much space." I looked down at my stroller, which was neatly tucked beside me, not blocking anyone's path. "Me, I'm sorry, but I don't think it's in the way. There's plenty of room to walk around." She sniffed disapprovingly, her eyes narrowing as she looked at my sleeping baby. Woman behind me, "Is that a newborn? He looks very small. How old is he?" Something about her tone made me uncomfortable, but I've been conditioned to be polite, especially to older people. "Me, he's 6 months old. Actually, he was born a little premature, so he's still catching up on his growth." Her face transformed into what I can only describe as fake concern. Woman behind me, 6 months? Are you sure? He looks underdeveloped. What are you feeding him? I felt my face getting hot. Every new mom knows that feeling, the immediate guilt and defensiveness when someone questions your parenting. "Me, he's on formula and we've started some solids. His pediatrician is very happy with his progress." Woman behind me, "Formula? Oh dear? No wonder he's so small. You know breast is best, right? Did you even try?" At this point, I was done being polite. The line had moved forward, and I pushed my stroller up, hoping to create some distance, but she followed right behind me. "Me, my feeding choices aren't really your business." Woman behind me, "Well, when I see a child who might not be getting proper care, it becomes my business." I was a nurse for 30 years. This was a lie, as I would later find out, but at the moment, it made me second-guess myself. Was I missing something? Was my son not thriving the way he should? The intrusive thoughts that plague every new parent came flooding back. The line moved again, and I was now second from the front. My son stirred in his sleep, making a little whimpering sound. I automatically reached down to rock the stroller gently. Woman behind me, you shouldn't rock them to sleep, you know? Creates bad habits. They need to learn self-soothing. I didn't respond. I was counting to 10 in my head, trying to keep my cool. The person in front of me got their order and moved away. I stepped up to the counter, where the barista, a young guy with kind eyes, smiled at me. Barista, the usual today? Me, yes, please. Large caramel latte with an extra shot. Woman behind me, coffee? You're drinking coffee while breastfeeding? No wonder your baby is underweight. I whirled around, my patience officially gone. Me, I already told you I'm not breastfeeding, and regardless, a moderate amount of caffeine is perfectly fine according to my doctor. Please stop commenting on my parenting. The woman gasped dramatically, as if I just admitted to feeding my baby motor oil. Then, to my horror, she stepped around me and bent down to look at my son. Woman behind me, let me see this poor baby. Someone needs to make sure he's okay. She actually reached for the stroller canopy to pull it back further. I grabbed the handle and pulled it away from her. Me, do not touch my baby or his stroller. Back off right now. The coffee shop had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now. The woman straightened up, her face twisted with indignation. Woman behind me, how dare you? I'm simply concerned for the welfare of an innocent child. Too many parents these days neglect their children, and someone has to stand up for them. Me, the only person harassing someone here is you. Please leave us alone. Barista, ma'am, I need to ask you to step back and respect her space. The woman turned her fury on the poor barista. Woman behind me, are you in on this too? Can't you see this baby needs help? Look at him, he's too small, and she's obviously not taking proper care of him. My son, disturbed by the loud voices, began to cry. I reached into the stroller to comfort him, which apparently was the wrong move in this woman's book. Woman behind me, see? She doesn't even know how to properly comfort a crying baby. You're supposed to pick them up, not pat them like a dog. I was about to respond when she did something that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She grabbed the handle of my stroller and tried to pull it away from me. Woman behind me, let me show you how to properly comfort a baby. I raised 3 children. All of them turned out perfect. I know what I'm doing. I held on to that stroller with every ounce of strength I had, while simultaneously trying to shield my now screaming son. Me, let go of my stroller right now. Someone help. Several people rushed forward, a man in a business suit, 2 college-age girls, and another mom who had been sitting with her toddler. They formed a barrier between me and the woman, forcing her to let go of the stroller. Business suit guy, back off, lady. You can't just grab someone's baby. Woman behind me, I was trying to help. This mother doesn't know what she's doing. Her baby is clearly neglected. She then launched into a lecture about baby-proofing techniques, proper feeding schedules, and the importance of tummy time, all while I was trying to comfort my terrified baby and keep myself from having a complete breakdown. College girl, someone call the police. The barista was already on it, phone to his ear, speaking quickly. The woman noticed and pulled out her own phone. Woman behind me, fine, if none of you will help this poor child, I'll call Child Protective Services myself. I'm rescuing this child from an unfit mother. And she actually did it. Right there in the middle of the coffee shop, she dialed the number for CPS and started speaking loudly into the phone. Woman behind me, yes, hello? I need to report a case of child neglect. I'm at Been There, done that coffee shop on Main Street. There's a mother here with an underweight, neglected baby. She's feeding him formula instead of breast milk and drinking caffeine. The baby is clearly distressed, and she won't let anyone help. I think the child needs to be removed from her care immediately for his own safety." There was a pause as she listened. Then her face contorted with anger. "Woman behind me, what do you mean you need evidence? I'm looking right at the evidence. I was a pediatric nurse for 30 years. I know neglect when I see it." Another pause. Woman behind me, "No, I have not physically examined the child. The mother won't let me near him. That's suspicious behavior, don't you think?" The absurdity of the situation might have been comical if it wasn't so terrifying. This stranger was trying to have my baby taken away because I wouldn't let her examine him in a coffee shop. The other mom who had stepped in to help came over to me, speaking softly. "Other mom, are you okay? Do you want to sit down? My table is right over there." I nodded gratefully, and she helped me wheel the stroller to her table. Her toddler looked at my crying baby with wide, curious eyes. "Other mom, I've got some toys in my bag if that would help distract him." Me, "Thank you so much." I managed to get my son out of the stroller and held him close, rocking and soothing him. The other mom's kindness was like a life raft in a stormy sea. Meanwhile, the woman was still on the phone, now sounding increasingly frustrated. Woman behind me, "Well, when can you send someone? This is an emergency." "What do you mean you won't? Don't you dare hang up on me." She looked at her phone in disbelief, then shoved it back into her purse. Her face was red with anger as she stormed over to where I was sitting. Woman behind me, "This is outrageous. They refuse to send anyone. What kind of system protects neglectful parents over innocent children? I'm going to file a complaint." The business suit guy stepped between us again. Business suit guy, "Ma'am, I think you need to leave now. The police are on their way, and you're causing a disturbance." Woman behind me, "The police? Why are the police coming? I'm not the one neglecting a child." It was at that moment that 2 police officers walked into the coffee shop. The barista immediately waved them over and began explaining the situation. I could see the woman's face change as she realized she might be in trouble. She quickly tried to change her story. Woman behind me, "Officers, thank goodness you're here. I was just trying to help this poor baby whose mother was ignoring his cries. I simply offered some advice, and she became hostile." The officers looked skeptical. One of them came over to me, while the other stayed with the woman. Police officer, "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you tell us what happened?" Through tears, I explained everything: how she had harassed me in line, tried to inspect my baby, attempted to pull away my stroller, and then called CPS to report me for neglect. The other customers who had witnessed everything corroborated my story. The business suit guy was particularly vocal. Business suit guy, "Officer, I saw the whole thing. This woman tried to physically take the baby's stroller away from his mother. She was the aggressor here, no question." The officer nodded and went back to confer with his partner. I couldn't hear everything they said to the woman, but I could see her becoming increasingly agitated, waving her hands and pointing at me repeatedly. Finally, one of the officers took out handcuffs. Woman behind me, "What? You're arresting me? This is absurd. I was trying to save that baby." Police officer, "Ma'am, you're being detained for attempted kidnapping and causing a public disturbance. You have the right to remain silent." As they read her rights, her face went through a series of expressions: shock, outrage, disbelief, and finally, fear. They led her out of the coffee shop in handcuffs, with her still protesting loudly that she was just trying to help. The coffee shop erupted in applause as she was removed. The manager came out from the back and announced that everyone's orders were on the house today. People came up to check on me and my son, offering words of support and sharing their own stories of encountering entitled people. The barista brought over my latte, along with a chocolate chip cookie. "Barista, I added an extra shot of caramel. Thought you might need it. And the cookies for when the little guy feels better. On the house, of course." My son had finally calmed down and was now looking around curiously, as if nothing had happened. Kids are resilient that way. I later found out that the woman had no connection to nursing or healthcare whatsoever. She was a retired real estate agent known in the community for her overbearing behavior. This wasn't even her first run-in with the law. She had previously been cited for harassment at the local library's Mommy and Me reading group. She was charged with attempted kidnapping, filing a false report, and disturbing the peace. I had to appear in court to testify against her, which was intimidating, but worth it. She ended up with community service and mandatory counseling, plus a restraining order preventing her from coming near me or my son. The experience was traumatic, but it also showed me the good in people. The coffee shop community rallied around me. The other mom who helped me that day is now one of my closest friends. We have playdates every week. The barista always gives my son a little cookie when we come in now that he's old enough for treats. My husband was horrified when I told him what happened during our next video call. He actually requested emergency leave and came home for 2 weeks to be with us. Seeing him hold our son after everything that had happened was healing for all of us. As for me, I've become more assertive. I no longer feel the need to be polite to people who overstep boundaries, especially when it comes to my child. And while the coffee shop incident was terrifying, it broke through that isolation I had been feeling. I'm now connected to a community of parents who understand the struggles and joys of raising children. So if there's one thing I learned from my encounter with an entitled woman in a coffee shop, it's that for every person who thinks they have the right to dictate how you live your life, there are many more who will stand beside you when it matters. Story 2. I never thought buying my first home would lead to the strangest battle of my life. But here we are. After 5 years of saving every penny while living in a cramped apartment downtown, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in Maple Creek Estates. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple ranch-style home with a small yard and enough space for me to finally breathe. The neighborhood looked peaceful during my visits, with tree-lined streets and well-kept yards. The real estate agent mentioned there was a homeowners association, but assured me they were hands-off and just maintained the community pool and organized the annual block party. The HOA fee is reasonable, she said, and they're really just there to make sure property values stay up. Nothing to worry about. I should have known better than to trust those words. My first week in the new house was spent unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. I was in the middle of assembling a bookshelf when someone started pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a woman in her mid-50s with a blonde bob haircut, so perfectly shaped it looked like it could cut glass. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and she was clutching a clipboard to her chest like it contained national secrets. "You're in violation," she announced without introducing herself. I blinked at her. "Excuse me." "Your garbage bins. They're visible from the street." She gestured toward my driveway where, indeed, my trash and recycling bins were sitting after being delivered that morning. "Oh, I just moved in. The sanitation department dropped them off a few hours ago. I'll move them around back after I finish unpacking." She clicked her pen and started writing on her clipboard. "That's a $50 fine. Bins must be stored out of sight at all times, except during the 12-hour window of collection day." Wait, what? I literally just got them today. I haven't even had a chance to. "Rules are rules," she cut me off. "I'm Karen, president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association." She looked me up and down like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Welcome to the neighborhood. You'll receive your fine in tomorrow's mail." With that, she spun on her heel and marched down my driveway. I stood there, mouth hanging open, wondering what had just happened. I moved the bins immediately, of course, but the whole encounter left a bad taste in my mouth. The next day, sure enough, an official-looking envelope was in my mailbox containing a notice of violation and instructions on how to pay my fine. I thought about contesting it, but decided it wasn't worth the hassle. Maybe I'd just gotten off on the wrong foot with this Karen person. That was the first of many encounters. 2 days later, I got another fine because my grass was approximately 1.2 centimeters above the maximum allowable height of 7.6 centimeters. I hadn't even unpacked my lawnmower yet. The week after that, I received a warning because I'd left my car in the driveway for excessive periods instead of parking it in the garage. I had been carrying groceries inside and left the car out for maybe 15 minutes. Then came the fine for unauthorized modifications when I hung a bird feeder from a tree in my backyard. Apparently, all external decor needed pre-approval, even if it wasn't visible from the street. Each time I tried to explain or reason with Karen, she'd cut me off with "rules are rules," or "this is how we maintain our property values." Every conversation ended the same way, with Karen walking away and me receiving another fine in my mailbox the next day. It didn't take long to notice that no one else in the neighborhood seemed to be under the same scrutiny. Some houses had basketball hoops in their driveways or decorative flags by their doors, things I'd been fined for even considering. When I pointed this out to Karen during one of her surprise inspections of my property, she simply said, "Those homeowners have been approved through the proper channels." After 2 months, I'd racked up over $600 in fines for infractions that ranged from the trivial to the absurd. I finally decided to read through the entire HOA rulebook, which turned out to be a 78-page monstrosity of microscopic print and contradictory regulations. Still, I couldn't find half the rules Karen claimed I was breaking. The breaking point came when I received a fine for excessive noise disturbance on a weekend when I wasn't even home. I'd been visiting my parents 2 states away. I decided enough was enough, and it was time to attend an HOA meeting to address these issues directly. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building next to the neighborhood pool. About 20 other homeowners were there, all sitting quietly as Karen stood at the front of the room with her trusty clipboard. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to address the growing problem of non-compliance in our community." She looked directly at me. "Some newer residents seem to think our rules are optional suggestions rather than binding agreements." I raised my hand. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she had to acknowledge me since everyone was watching. "Yes, the new resident in Lot 47. I stood up. "I have some questions about the fines I've been receiving. Some of them cite rules I can't find in the handbook." Karen's plastic smile didn't waver. "Perhaps you need to read more carefully." "I've read it cover to cover," I replied. "For example, where does it state that bird feeders require pre-approval? Or that cars can't be in driveways for more than 10 minutes? Or that grass length is measured in centimeters to 1/10 of a decimal place?" A murmur went through the room. Some people were nodding. "We have always enforced these standards," Karen said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "This is why Maple Creek is the premier neighborhood in this area." An older man in the back raised his hand. "I've lived here for 15 years, and I've had a bird feeder the whole time. Never heard a word about it." A woman a few seats away from me added, "And my teenagers leave their cars in the driveway all the time. Never been fined once." Karen's face flushed red. "Those situations are different. They've been grandfathered in." "That's not in the rule book either," I pointed out. "And I've noticed only certain homes get cited for violations. Seems pretty selective." More murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Karen banged her gavel on the table. "We're moving on," she declared. "Next on the agenda is the annual block party budget." I stayed after the meeting, along with a few other homeowners who shared similar stories of Karen's targeted enforcement. One woman told me she'd been fined for having the wrong shade of beige on her window trim. An elderly couple had received warnings about their grandchildren being too loud while playing in their fenced backyard. The next morning, I had a new notice in my mailbox. But this wasn't a fine, it was a formal cease and desist letter claiming I had slandered the reputation of the HOA president and incited community discord. The letter demanded I pay $2,000 in damages for emotional distress caused to the board, and warned that failure to comply would result in escalated actions. I was furious. This was beyond ridiculous, it was harassment. I decided to seek legal advice and called a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. After reviewing my stack of fines and the HOA bylaws, The lawyer looked genuinely perplexed. Lawyer, these fines don't correlate with any actual rules in your HOA covenant. And this cease and desist letter has no legal standing whatsoever. Who exactly is issuing these? Me, the HOA president, Karen. She's the one who delivers most of them personally. Lawyer, and who else is on the board? Have you dealt with any other board members? I realized I hadn't. In 2 months, every interaction had been with Karen alone. I'd never seen or heard from any other HOA officials. The lawyer suggested I request the HOA's financial records and board meeting minutes, which as a homeowner, I had a legal right to see. I submitted a formal request the next day. 3 days later, Karen was at my door again. But this time she wasn't alone. A man in a suit stood beside her, looking uncomfortable. Karen, how dare you request our private records? This is another example of your disruptive behavior. Me, as a homeowner and HOA member, I have a legal right to see those documents. Karen, you've been nothing but trouble since you moved in. You're disrupting the peace of this community and causing me severe emotional distress. Your constant defiance is affecting my health. The man beside her tried to interject, but Karen steamrolled over him. Karen, the board has discussed your case and decided on appropriate action. You'll be receiving a notice of special assessment. Your property will be transferred to the HOA as compensation for the damage you've caused. My jaw dropped. You want my house? Are you out of your mind? Karen, it's all perfectly legal. Article 17, Section B allows the board to assess special penalties for continuous violations. The man in the suit finally spoke up. Man, Karen, I told you that's not what that provision means. We can't take someone's house. Karen looked at him like he'd sprouted a second head. Karen, of course we can. I'm the president, and I say we can. Man, actually, I'm the president. You're the secretary. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's face went from red to purple. Karen, that's ridiculous. I've been running this HOA for 8 years. Man, you've been handling administrative duties, yes, but you've never been the president. I am. And I don't recognize half of these fines you've been issuing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The actual HOA president had no idea what Karen had been doing. Over the next few days, the truth came out. Karen had been posing as the HOA president for years, creating her own rules and collecting fines that never made it into the association's accounts. The actual board had been under the impression that she was simply handling paperwork and day-to-day complaints, not running a one-woman reign of terror over select homeowners. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and nearly everyone in the neighborhood attended. The real board members sat at the front, with the president, whose name was actually Richard, explaining the situation. Richard, it appears our secretary has been operating beyond her authority for some time. She has been issuing unauthorized fines, making up rules that don't exist in our bylaws, and possibly pocketing the money collected from these fraudulent penalties. Karen wasn't at the meeting. According to neighborhood gossip, she'd locked herself in her house and refused to come out when the board members tried to speak with her. Richard apologized to everyone who had been affected and promised a full audit of all fines issued in the past several years. He asked anyone who had paid fines directly to Karen to come forward with their records. As people shared their stories, a pattern emerged. Karen had primarily targeted newer residents who wouldn't know any better, or people she had personal grudges against. Some residents had paid thousands of dollars in bogus fines over the years. The HOA hired a forensic accountant who discovered Karen had collected over $50,000 in fraudulent fines during her tenure, none of which had gone into the HOA coffers. She had used the money to renovate her kitchen, take luxury vacations, and buy designer clothes, all while claiming to protect property values in the neighborhood. Legal action was swift. Karen was removed from the HOA board and faced multiple civil lawsuits from homeowners she had defrauded. Criminal charges for fraud and impersonation followed. The police found stacks of fake letterhead, official-looking stamps, and meticulous records of all her violations in her home office. The real HOA board completely restructured how violations were handled. From then on, all potential infractions required photographic evidence and approval from at least 3 board members before a notice could be issued. All fines had to be paid directly to the HOA treasurer, with proper receipts provided. Karen eventually moved away before her court date, but her house was seized to help pay restitution to all the homeowners she had scammed over the years. She left behind a community that was more unified than ever, ironically brought together by her tyranny. As for me, I not only got all my money back, but I ended up joining the HOA board myself to help ensure nothing like this ever happened again. My first proposal: installing a bird feeder in the community garden. Richard told me they'd been meaning to do that for years, but someone kept shooting down the idea. I wonder who that could have been. It's been 2 years since the Karen incident, as we now call it. Maple Creek is the peaceful neighborhood I'd initially hoped for, with reasonable rules that are fairly enforced. Sometimes new residents ask about the Queen of Maple Street after hearing rumors from neighboring communities. We tell them the story as a cautionary tale about unchecked power and the importance of community involvement. In the end, Karens need to control everything, cost her everything. Sometimes I look at the before and after pictures of our neighborhood that hang in the community center, before showing Karen's rule of intimidation and selective enforcement, and after showing our block parties, community gardens, and, yes, the rows of bird feeders that line our streets. The birds seem to like it here now, so do the people. Story 3. I've been a firefighter for almost 15 years now. I love my job, despite the long hours and sometimes dangerous situations. What I never expected was that one of my most stressful encounters wouldn't be with a raging inferno, but with an entitled woman at the local grocery store. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was on duty at Station 12. We'd been running drills all morning, and it was my turn to grab lunch for the crew. Nothing fancy, just some sandwiches, fruit, and drinks to keep us going through our 24-hour shift. Our station has an arrangement with a local supermarket. Because we're on call and might need to leave at any moment, they let us skip the line when we're in uniform and on duty. It's not something I take advantage of often, but that day we'd gotten a call about a potential gas leak that turned out to be nothing, which put me behind schedule for the lunch run. I walked into the store, grabbed a basket, and quickly collected everything on my list. The store was busy, it usually is around lunchtime, and I noticed the lines were pretty long. I felt a little bad about using my skip-the-line privilege, but my radio was buzzing with chatter, and I knew I needed to get back to the station. I approached the front of the line, nodded politely to the cashier who recognized me, and began placing my items on the conveyor belt. Woman behind me: "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned around to see a woman glaring at me. She was probably in her 40s, with an expensive-looking handbag and sunglasses perched on top of her head. Me: "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm on duty and need to get back to my station." Woman: "So that gives you the right to cut in line. I've been waiting for 15 minutes. Me: "I understand, and I apologize for the inconvenience. The store has an arrangement with our fire station since we're on call." Woman: "That's ridiculous. You're not responding to an emergency right now. You're buying groceries like the rest of us." By this point, people in line were starting to stare. The cashier, who knew me from my regular visits, tried to intervene. Cashier: "Ma'am, this is our store policy. Emergency responders on duty can." Woman: "I don't care about your policy. This is blatant favoritism and abuse of power." She pulled out her phone and, to my absolute shock, started dialing 911. Me: "Ma'am, please don't tie up emergency services for this. I'd be happy to explain." Woman: "Hello? Yes, I need to report an entitled government worker who's abusing his power. He cut in front of everyone in line at the supermarket on Oak Street, and he's being extremely aggressive." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman was actually reporting me to emergency services, the very system I was a part of. I stood there, completely dumbfounded, as she continued her rant. Woman: "Yes, he's a firefighter, but he's not responding to any emergency. He's just buying his lunch and thinks the rules don't apply to him. What the woman didn't know was that the dispatcher who took her call worked directly with our station. I could hear the familiar voice of our dispatcher through the woman's phone, trying to explain the situation. Dispatcher over phone. Ma'am, are you calling 911 to report a firefighter shopping for his station while on duty? Woman. Yes, and he's being very aggressive and threatening. This was a complete lie. I hadn't raised my voice or made any threatening gestures. Dispatcher over phone. Ma'am, I work with that fire station. The firefighters have an arrangement with that store because they need to be able to respond quickly to emergencies. You're tying up emergency services with a non-emergency call. The woman's face turned an even deeper shade of red. Woman, don't you dare dismiss me. I pay your salary with my taxes. I want to speak to your supervisor. She hung up the phone and turned back to me, pointing her finger at my chest. Woman, you put those groceries back right now and wait in line like a civilian. At this point, I decided the best course of action was to leave. I turned to the cashier. I'm sorry about this. I'll come back later. But as I tried to step away, the woman physically moved to block my path. Woman, oh no, you don't. You're not going anywhere until you learn your lesson. Ma'am, please step aside. I need to return to my station. Woman, not until you put everything back and wait in line like everyone else. My radio crackled, someone at the station wondering where I was with lunch. I tried to step around her, but she kept moving to block me. This went on for a few minutes, with her becoming increasingly agitated. Eventually, probably because of her 911 call, a police officer arrived at the store. The woman immediately turned to him, her demeanor changing instantly. Woman, officer, thank goodness you're here. This firefighter threatened me when I confronted him about cutting in line. The police officer looked at me, and I could tell he was trying not to roll his eyes. He knew we'd responded to many of the same calls over the years. Officer, sir, what's your side of the story? I explained the situation calmly, including the store's policy and how the woman had blocked me from leaving. Several customers in line nodded, confirming my account. Woman, they're all lying. He threatened me. I want him arrested. The officer turned to the woman. Officer, ma'am, did you call 911 over someone using a store's policy to check out quickly? Woman, he was abusing his power. Officer, and did you physically prevent him from leaving after he tried to defuse the situation? Woman, I was making a citizen's arrest. The officer sighed. Officer, ma'am, I'm going to need to see your ID. Woman, why? I'm the victim here. Officer, you've filed a false police report, caused a public disturbance, and obstructed an emergency responder. Those are serious offenses. The woman's face went pale. Woman, this is ridiculous. You can't arrest me. My cousin's husband is a police officer in the next county over. Officer, is that so? What's his name? Woman, Officer Johnson. The officer didn't look impressed. Officer, ma'am, please put your hands behind your back. As the officer began to handcuff her, the reality of the situation finally seemed to sink in. Woman, you can't do this. I have immunity. I know important people. Officer, ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The officer continued reading her rights as he led her out of the store. The entire place erupted in applause as she left. The cashier quickly rang up my items, refusing to let me pay. Cashier, it's on the house today. Sorry you had to go through that. I thanked her and headed back to the station, where I told the story to my crew. They couldn't believe it. Our dispatcher later told us that the woman had tried to demand immunity during booking because her cousin's husband was a cop in another county. Needless to say, that didn't work out for her. She ended up being charged with filing a false police report, causing a public disturbance, and obstructing an emergency responder. I had to appear in court to testify, which was a pain, but worth it to see justice served. The irony of the whole situation wasn't lost on any of us. She'd wasted far more time getting arrested and dealing with illegal consequences than she would have if she'd just waited her turn in line like everyone else. Sometimes entitlement comes with a price, and sometimes that price includes a pair of handcuffs and a day in court.